Thank you very much, Grace. Today we will be talking about the P0.1, which is the pressure generated in the first 100 milliseconds of inspiration. And you are all familiar with my famous slide that we have a dual pump system where we have the ventilator on one side giving the positive pressure and the patient on the other side generating negative pressure in the chest. And when we talk about protective lung strategy, we mean to optimize the ventilator pressure and volume to limit the lung stress and strain and avoid lung and diaphragmatic injury. In other words, we like to avoid ventilator-induced lung injury. On the other hand, we need to optimize patients' inspiratory efforts to avoid lung and diaphragmatic injury while maintaining acceptable reasonable hemostasis. This is to avoid patient self-inflicted lung injury. So the negative pressure that is generated by the patient can cause an increase in the transpulmonary pressure, and those alveoli will be under more pressure if the patient added his negative pressure to the pressure generated by the ventilator. And in the previous ventilator round, we talked about the end expiratory occlusion test. And we said we're going to occlude the airways at end of expiration. And when we occlude the airways, the patient is going to, if he has inspiratory efforts, is going to generate negative pressure in the airways against occluded airways. And we learned that this occlusion pressure is very closely related to the esophageal pressure of the patient. And we can use it to determine the transpulmonary pressure. And in general, we take 2/3 of that occlusion pressure to represent the esophageal pressure. And the transpulmonary pressure is the change in the airway pressure added to the change in the esophageal pressure. This way we can understand what is the pressure that is placed on the alveoli, or the extending pressure from both ends, the ventilator and the intrathoracic. So now let's magnify this occlusion maneuver that we did for the patient. And today we're going to be interested in the first 100 milliseconds of that occlusion pressure. Now, this can be done either in a patient who has just pressure tracing, or it can be done also if we have esophageal pressure tracing. It would be the same mechanism. The first 100 milliseconds, we need to measure that negative pressure. How much this pressure at 100 milliseconds would represent the P0.1. So let's just look at it more closely. This is a patient. As you see, he dropped his negative pressure. He dropped his airway pressure by his negative inspiratory efforts. And he triggered the ventilator. Triggered the ventilator at probably -2 centimeters of water here. So the patient dropped the pressure from PEEP of 5 to -2 centimeters of water. Then trigger the ventilator. So let's take this, magnify it, and look at it more carefully. You will see that the patient triggered the ventilator at this point here, which is -2 centimeters of water. The ventilator is triggered and the breath was given. However, if you take a look on the time scale here, you can see that the ventilator was triggered at probably 120 milliseconds. And we are interested in measuring the pressure that is generated by the patient at 100 milliseconds. So we take a column all the way up and we measure this pressure. You can see this pressure is minus 1 centimeter of water added to 5 centimeter of water of the PEEP. That gives you minus 6 centimeter of water. Now in the initial part of the breath, when the patient is contracting his inspiratory muscles, decreasing the intrathoracic pressure, is doing this against occluded airways. The inspiratory valve did not open yet. The inspiratory valve opened for the patient at this point when the ventilator is triggered. This is in the old ventilators. Now we have newer ventilators where the inspiratory valve is open all the time. The patient can breathe in and out. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. But here, the airways are occluded because the inspiratory valve is not open yet. And the pressure decrease here represents the inspiratory or the respiratory drive. The muscles did not see yet any effect of airway resistance or lung and chest wall elastance. So the drop in the pressure here in the first 100 milliseconds would be an indication of what's happening in the respiratory drive. Of course, you need to have good muscles also to be able to generate that drop in the pressure. Now in the newer ventilators, number one, the ventilators are much more responsive than the older ones in terms of the sensitivity to the trigger. And number two, the airways are not occluded. So here you have no occlusion. And this is specifically how the Hamilton G5 works. So as you see here, the ventilator was triggered in less time than 100 milliseconds. And the airways are open. So what does the ventilator do is, it will look at, of course we're interested to know the pressure at 100 milliseconds. But this is where the ventilator was triggered. So the ventilator will look at the steepest part of the drop in the pressure. And it will look at the change of the pressure over change of time. And extrapolate this to see what is the pressure if that is continued with this slope here. That pressure would be at that point minus 3 centimeter plus 5 centimeter, that would be minus 8 centimeter of water. So it's extrapolation based on part of that initial drop in the pressure. And to elicit the idea in a clearer way, let's take a look on these two patients where the pressure support on the patient on the left is only 7 centimeter of water and PEEP of 5, compared to pressure support of 14 on the right side and PEEP of 8. So apparently this patient has higher level of support compared to this patient. So in the first breath here, you will see this is the pressure tracing and this is the flow tracing, flow over time, pressure over time. You can see that the patient drops the pressure and triggers the ventilator. The pressure goes up to pressure support of 12, total pressure of 12, 7 plus 5, 12 centimeter of water in the first breath, which is triggered. And now let's do occlusion test here. As you see, we did that at the end of expiration, flow is 0, and this is the start of the effort. The patient dropped the pressure. We're interested to know the pressure that is generated in the first 100 milliseconds of the occlusion. And this pressure is 3.8 centimeter, negative value. Let's compare this with a patient on the right side. You can see that we did the same thing. However, this patient is on pressure support of 14 and PEEP of 8. Start of the efforts here, drop in the pressure in the first 100 milliseconds is only 0.8 centimeter of water. This tells you that this support is too much for the patient. With too much support, you inhibited the respiratory drive. This is more appropriate support for the patient, even though excuse me, he can benefit from a bit higher pressure support to get p-value around 1.5 to 3.5. I'm sorry, not p-value, P0.1. And that takes me to the normal values of P0.1. In patients on the ventilator, we like to see P0.1 in the range of 1.5 to 3.5 centimeter of water. This would indicate that you have appropriate sedation and appropriate level of support. If the patient is doing SPT trial, this would be associated with higher rate of weaning success. If the P0.1 is less than 1.5, that may indicate either the patient has low respiratory drive, meaning that patient is oversedated, or of course his respiratory drive is inhibited because of either intoxication, drug use, or pathology in the CNS. It may also indicate that you're giving the patient a very high level of support. If the pressure support that you're giving the patient is too high, if you're doing the work for him, he doesn't have to do it. So that is the over assistance. And at the same time, if you have a patient who's on SPT, this would indicate that there is a higher rate of weaning failure. On the other side, if the P0.1 is more than 3.5 centimeter of water, this could indicate that the patient has high respiratory drive, or you're giving him insufficient level of support, and this is under assistance. If the patient is doing SPT trial, it would be associated with higher rate of weaning failure. We will be talking more about under assistance and over assistance in the next ventilator round, as we're going to be talking about the lung and diaphragm protective ventilation. And these are the two mechanisms responsible for the myotrauma of the diaphragm and other inspiratory muscles. So let's take some examples and look at how we can measure this pressure on the ventilator. Of course, it's different from one ventilator to another. So if we take a look on the dragger ventilator, you need to go to special procedures. If you click on this, it will open a window like this. You can see that it has 3 tabs. You need to click on diagnostics. And then you can see that you have the P0.1 here. You need to click on start. So this is an active maneuver, and you can actually set an interval to do so. You can set it every 5 minutes, and you can get more than one value. And you cannot rely on a single value. You need at least 3 values and take the mean of these 3 values. So if you do it and the number is 1.5, do it again and see what's the number and get the average of 3 numbers. If you set the ventilator here to do it every 5 minutes, the machine will keep doing this. It will occlude the airways and will measure the pressure every 5 minutes. You can see here that the patient had 2 maneuvers. First one gave a pressure of 2.3, which is negative value, and the second one gave 2.5. Very appropriate level of support and sedation. On the Hamilton ventilator, this is the G5, is different. You need first to change the trigger from flow to pressure. Click on the controls, and then you can see now it is set at to sense the flow. You need to change from flow by clicking on this button here to pressure. Now it is set to sense the pressure. The patient needs to drop -2 centimeters of water in order to trigger the ventilator. We're just interested in the first 100 milliseconds of this pressure drop. And then you can go to monitoring, and you can see the values that measured by the ventilator. At this point is -3.9 centimeters of water in the first 100 milliseconds of inspiratory efforts. Again, the airways are not included on Hamilton. So this pressure is measured by extrapolation of the slope of the curve in the initial part of the inspiration to reach the 100 milliseconds as we just discussed. And this is just to show you that on this ventilator, this is a screenshot of a patient that I saw. You change from flow trigger to pressure trigger. By default, it's 5 liters per minute. You can change that, of course. Similarly, you can change the pressure trigger, put it at the level that you want. And let's take a look on this patient. As you see, this patient is on ABV CMV, tidal volume of 400, PEEP of 8. And you can see the pressure goes up to 25, 28, and then probably the plateau is around 25. Inspiratory flow goes up to 50 liters. It looks like it's adequate assistance by the machine. However, when we do the P0.1, we get a value of -6.2 centimeters. And then repeated is -4.8. As I said, you need at least 3 values and get the average. But here, with this higher number of P0.1, this would indicate that this patient has a high respiratory drive. Of course, it could be under assistance, but I see that the volume, and we need to look at the ideal body weight of the patient to make sure that the volume he's getting is adequate. And this is the pressure required to get this volume in. If that volume is adequate for the ideal body weight, we can rule out under assistance, and this is caused by high respiratory drive, and this patient would need to be sedated in a better way. Now, take a look on this patient. He's on spontaneous with pressure support of 8 and PEEP of 5. And this is actually long-term weaning process for a patient who is dependent on the ventilator. Excuse me. And we're weaning the pressure support level gradually. You can see with this pressure support, we're able to get a good volume and good rate, and RSPI is not too bad, or actually it's good. Rapid shallow breathing index is 45, but we're using 8 centimeters of water above the PEEP of 5 in order to generate that tidal volume of 300 to 400. Now take a look on the P0.1. You will see that the patient has very low values. So the question now would be whether you give him too much assistance and he doesn't have to do the work, or actually he's got low respiratory drive, which is the case in this patient. He has a low respiratory drive that is not able to participate much in generation of his respiratory efforts. And the next patient here, you can see that he's on PEEP of 8 and pressure support of 8, total pressure of 16, RSPI is 43, and P0.1 is -1.6. Those are very adequate values for the patient. it indicates that the assist is appropriate and the respiratory drive is appropriate. You can go down on the pressure support and the PEEP gradually for this long-term mechanically ventilated patient. With this, I would like to stop and see if there are any questions. Thank you very much.